as I've been here, is that if you've been here a while, you've seen some people that have left, they were irreplaceable, and some of them have come back. And I believe that's just the provision of God. Over the next 2 weeks, we're going to hear from two of those people. One of them is from Calgary, our own Deb Runnels, who unfortunately, the poor girl, pray for, has to work for me now. So, but Deb was a gift to this organization for a number of years, felt like she couldn't be here anymore, but has come back to us. And I think she feels like she's come back. So Steve Griffin back there, he's come back to us too, so we're happy to see him. But that's true. The other young lady who's going to speak next week is named Deb Fawcett, and I had the opportunity to get to hang out with her for about 45 minutes, maybe about 2 months ago over Waves Coffee. Unbelievable heart. Worked at the Edmonton Mustard Seed as a chaplain, went off with the Neighbor Center, came back when the Neighbor Center came back and as part of the Edmonton Mustard Seed now, and they're all working together. And a real gift to our organization when these folks who cared about it, they lived it, they breathed it, and it meant so much to them that even for a season they were gone, it was still part of their lives, and they've come back to bless us. And we were very fortunate to have that. And so next week, that's Deb Fawcett, who's a chaplain up there in Edmonton. And then this morning, we're going to hear from our own Deb Runnels down here in Calgary. So everybody give Deb a round of applause.
Good morning, Edmonton. Good morning, Shelter. Good morning, everyone. So I think what I wanted to do was just talk about why I'm back here. And part of that was looking at the mustard seed as a whole. And many of you know I never really left because I was back all the time visiting. But we're an organization that's really quite unique in that we're very strong with strategic planning and growing hope and walking with people and lifting up people and crying with them and laughing with them and celebrating with them and sometimes burying them. But we're that family to those people. And with our purpose being to bring hope and wellness to the most vulnerable citizens, and that's through Jesus' love, that call is really powerful, and it's one that everybody who comes here makes a commitment to as a staff member. And I think that there's something in that, there's a seed planted that really never goes away. And it reminded me that we're really an agency of miracles. And you only see the miracle when your faith is really strong and intact, because it's through faith that we can see miracles. It's when those things happen. Hello, everybody. Come on in. It's when those things happen that make no sense to us, but yet they're right in front of us. Whether it's a sunrise that you will hear attributed to the fact of it's the cycles of the earth and the moon and the solar system, or it can be just God. And when we hear things like that, our faith will then be challenged to see, are these just things that happen in this world by accident, coincidence, Darwin, or is it really through our faith acts of God? And so I thought what I'd like to do is share with you where my faith came from. And so this is going to be my faith journey this morning. And I think what it will do is just to help remind all of us, I hope, to remember, where does our faith come from? Where does it go when it disappears at those times? And what is that connection that brings us back? So many of you know I've got a picture. I'm 2 and my husband's 4, and we're in Sunday school together. So we've known each other a really long, long time. And we got married when I was 19 and had our first child when I was 20. When he was born, he was very blue, and the doctors said he had a horrible heart defect. Now, as someone who had grown up in the Anglican Church and taught Sunday school and so on, I really relied on prayer then very powerfully. And there was a new procedure that had been developed to repair this heart defect in London, England, by a Dr. Mustard, yes, just spelled like it sounds. So it was called the Mustard procedure. And it was done on babies with this horrible heart defect at 1 year. And then at that point, those kids would live to age 10. So I'm 20 years old, still trying to figure out who I am as a growing up woman and as a wife, and suddenly am a mother to a child with a very small chance of living a full life. So for the first year, we lived with this baby who was in the hospital a lot, bad heart, was navy blue the whole time because he had transposition of the great vessels. So that means that on half of his body, his blood did what it should do, and it went from his body into his heart through the lungs to get oxygenated and back into the body. But on the other half, it just went from the heart to the body. There was no oxygen. And so that created kind of that blue tinge to his skin. So anyways, at 1 year, the doctor said, okay, he's ready. He's strong enough now to have this surgery. The way that Victoria Hospital was set up in London, Ontario is Children's was on one side of the road and the adult hospital was on the other side of the road. And there was actually a tunnel that went under that road to get back and forth. And I remember going under that tunnel when I was 5 and told the first lie I remember, which was that my sister was the oldest one. She wasn't, I was. Because we were all in to get our tonsils out, because back then you got the family plan. And I wanted to see if she died or not before they took mine out. So I said she was older, so they would take hers out first. So I knew this tunnel very well. So on the day of Scott's surgery, we arrived at the hospital with my husband's parents, my parents, and our minister and his wife. And the 2 surgeons came under the tunnel and came into the children's hospital and said, you know, we're ready to go. And they said there's a 10% chance that he won't make it. So this is a surgery that's done quite often, and this was done in 1980. So no computers. They had to do it by phone, speaking to Dr. Mustard. And so they said it's got a pretty good outcome. So they took Scott's hand, my little blonde-headed son, and walked down the tunnel, and he waved goodbye, and under they went, and we waited on the children's side, and then at 4 hours, the 2 doctors came back over in their suits, and they said it went really, really well. We've put a hole in his heart and put a patch over it made out of Dacron. And so this patch will now cause the blood to flow through the lungs, so he should be good, and he should live till he's 10. So we went home knowing right from the beginning that was going to be the story, except that at about 6 weeks of age, Scott started having just a little bit of swelling under his eyes. Well, within a week and a half, his head was so swollen, I had to carry it. His neck wouldn't hold his head up anymore. And I kept taking him to the hospital and taking him to the doctors, and they said it was tonsils and ear infections and gum infections. And at the time I was working at a doctor's office, so I went to the doctor and I said, who's the best pediatrician in London? He told me. I drove Scott over to the doctor's office, walked right past the receptionist, opened every door till I saw Dr. Lubell, and I laid Scott on the bed and I said, something's wrong with my son. And he said, he's in congestive heart failure, get him into the hospital. So we took Scott back in. Well, what had happened was his heart had overhealed. They had cut him open from his neck right down to his groin, right over his heart, and it had actually overhealed. So scar tissue had blocked the vena cava, so the fluids were pumping into his head through his spine and everything, but couldn't drain out. And they said, we've got to go in and remove that scar tissue. They said, it's not a very good outcome. It's 50-50 that he'll make it, because we've never done a second time before. So they had to do it on the phone with Dr. Mustard. So they said, we'll book him in the hospital. So my husband and I went with our parents and our minister and his wife to the hospital, and the doctors came under the tunnel and took Scott's hand, and Scott was 1.5 years old by then. And they went under the tunnel. So we waited 4 hours like the last one, and then 6 hours, and then 8 hours, and then the doctors came back out under the tunnel, and they said it went really good in the sense that they were able to remove the Dacron patch and put in a new one, but they said scar tissue had so filled his heart that they said they could knock on it. It sounded like wood when they knocked on it. So they had to take a big chunk of his heart as well. And so they said that really changes the outcome for this little boy. He's not going to make it to 10, but we don't know what will happen. And they were able to use the same scar from his neck down to his groin again. And so through prayer and through our church family, we thought we're just going to celebrate this little life for as long as we have it. And so we took Scott home, and 3 days later he was at the Western Fair in London, and we went on with our lives until 6 weeks later when he started with the puffiness under his eyes again. And so we took him into the hospital, and the doctor said, there's nothing we can do. He doesn't have enough heart left for us to do anything. Take him home, and he's just going to have to die at home. So we took Scott home at just a little over 1.5 years, and that was a real time of testing my faith, because I really wanted to be really angry at this God who could darn well have made sure this heart was healthy before he was born, or could sure reach down and do something now, and he wasn't. And yet, as I was going through that, and in meeting with my minister, I began to understand that he had already had it twice and had lived when they didn't think he would. And so in the end, if this is what was going to happen, that's what would happen. As Scott's head kept getting bigger and bigger, I couldn't stand the sound of the gurgling anymore. I just knew my boy was suffering. So we decided we would phone the surgeons, and I said, we've decided it's better he die on the operating table and you trying to do something than for us to just sit here and wait. So the doctor said they would call us. It'd be very little notice before they could get an OR and just get a team together. So we got a call at about 12:30 in the morning saying that they had an OR first thing in the morning. So we were to get Scott up at 4:30 and bring him in. So we had our minister come over to the house, and we went into a lot of prayer, and we just held our boy because we didn't know what this meant. So we got to the hospital, and the doctor said 90% chance he's not going to make it, because no matter what we do to his heart, there's not enough there for us to do anything. And they said the pericardium, the scar tissue, was sticking to this Dacron patch and the pericardium around the heart. So when they removed the patch, they didn't know what was left. So we said goodbye to our son, and he walked down holding their hands under the tunnel, and we just all sat on the children's side in really deep prayer and just really saying goodbye. And we waited 6 hours and 8 hours and 10 hours, and then 12 hours later, the surgeons came running across the street, still in their OR garb, covered in blood, and they said, you've got to come over to the adult side. He's in ICU. He's on the heart-lung machine. It will keep him alive, but we want you to come and say goodbye. So we went over to the adult side, left our parents and our minister on this side, and we went over. So to get into the ICU, you had to scrub and iodine and put on gowns and masks, because this is where all the adults who were very severely ill also were. So we went in, and in this great big giant bed was this little tiny boy with all these tubes and this machine that was acting on behalf of his heart. And there were alarms going off because his heart wasn't beating, so every time it tried to beat, the alarm went off on the machine. So we sat with him for hours, and then the nurses came and said, you know, the machine will keep him alive for quite a bit longer. Go home and sleep. So our parents and our minister said, we'll stay here. You guys go home. So we went home to sleep, and after a few hours, we came back. So we visited with our families for a bit, and then we went in, pushed the buzzer, and said to the nurses, we're here to see Scott Runnels. And they said, come on in. So that meant nobody was in crisis in the room. So then we gowned and everything and went in. Meanwhile, a friend of ours from our church family worked at London Life in London, Ontario. She was at work, and she passed out at her desk. When she came to, she phoned the minister's wife and said, where's Kim and Deb? Kim's my husband. And the minister's wife said, they're at the hospital with Scott. He's dying. So she flew down to the hospital and met with our parents and our minister and said, I passed out at work and I had a vision. And there was a river, and Scott was standing on one side of the river, and Jesus was on the other side. Jesus walked across the river, picked Scott up, and kissed him. She said, but he put Scott down and went back without him. He didn't take him. Scott's not going to die. Well, they couldn't tell us this. We had already gone over to the ICU. So we had buzzed and told the nurses we were there. When we got in, the stretcher's there, Scott's little body's on the stretcher, and the sheet's right over his face. And we were like, oh my gosh, he's died. And then he pulled the sheet down and went, boo. He had heard us announce that we were there. And so he was hiding on us, so I was really happy. I don't know how you choke a child who's got all those tubes on, but I wanted to. And he was sitting there with a plate of scrambled eggs, and he's eating these scrambled eggs. And then he burst into tears. So he was 2 years old and just sobbing. And the nurses came because all the alarms started going off. And he said, Mom, Jesus doesn't want me. And I said, what do you mean Jesus doesn't want you? He said, Jesus doesn't love me. And I said, why? And he said, because I was at the big water. And I was on one side, and Jesus was on the other side. And he came over and picked me up and kissed me. And I wanted to go with him, but he put me down and went without me. And I wanted to go with him. He didn't want me. I didn't know at the time our friend had had that exact same vision. But then I looked down, and twice they opened Scott up from the neck to the groin. They couldn't get through the scar tissue to do the surgery that way again. So they had to go across. And he has this perfect cross lying over his heart. So on August 7th, Scott will turn 37. And he is the father of my two eldest granddaughters, Emily, who turns 12 on August 1st and is flying out here by herself August 3rd because she's 12 and can get on a plane on her own, and Isabel, who is 10. So Scott's got less than half a heart. He has no SA node, which is the node that causes your heart to beat. He shouldn't be here. It makes no sense to anyone that he's in books and studies all over. But what I learned from this is the power of faith, because I wouldn't have been able to dream about a miracle, including saying to the doctors, do something, open him up, try again. I'd rather he die there than just lay at home. And so we're blessed here because we get to walk in the presence of such faith that we see miracles every day. When we see someone who comes to us and has a key in their hand to what sometimes is their very first home, or is able to say to you, I've been clean for 3 days. Those 3 days are the longest 3 days of their life. That is a miracle. And if day 4 doesn't have that same story written in it, it doesn't matter. What matters is how blessed we were to be invited into that celebration, and how blessed we are to be there on day 4 if that celebration ends for that moment in time. And so as I think about why we're all here and what keeps bringing us back to the craziness of this work sometimes, that's where the faith comes in. And that's where the miracles will be seen, is when you believe that there can be miracles, and when your eyes are opened to looking around you and going, oh my goodness. Since coming back, I've seen so many folks here that I've thought, oh, I wonder if they're even still alive. And so many have come rushing to the doors going, we've heard Deb's back. Like, that's a miracle to me, to be welcomed back by some of the most important people in my life. And those are the friends that I got to work with while I was here. So I just encourage each of you to think that miracles aren't Old Testament, and they're not gone. They're hard to find because they can only be seen through faith. Otherwise, we're going to find ways to turn them into an explanation for why they happened. And so I just call on each of you to be thankful for the miracle that you're here, because you're going to be witness to some of the most powerful things on this planet, and that's a blessing. So I'd like to just ask each of you to join me in prayer. We lost one of our residents yesterday in our 14th Street building, and so I'd just like you to lift up him. We have a funeral coming up tomorrow for a mother and a daughter who were killed in our city and who are being, mourned by an entire community, not because they were known, but because they were part of. And as we do that, as some of the heavy stuff of our work, then we thank God that we've got the faith to be able to know that it's all in His hands and it's all good. Heavenly Father, we just gather together, bow our heads, and lift up our hearts to you in gratitude for this moment in time where you have called us together to serve, for the miracles that we are witness to in your name. We ask you be with all those who grieve and who face losses. Lift them up and let them know that you are there. You're their comforter. And we just praise you, God, for this place where in service we are so invited into the lives of so many. And I thank you for welcoming me back and bringing me back to this team of people who I get to serve beside. In Jesus' name, amen.
That's right.
It was uplifting. Yeah. That was one of the better talking about a lot of stuff.